As we move deeper into Richard Powers' novel, The Overstory, we should pause perhaps to kind of take account again of the political dimensions of this novel. When you read this novel, are you reading it as an act of political rhetoric as well? Is that kind of at work underneath the text to kind of drive you towards greater ecological engagement, and because of that need for engagement, do you find yourself being driven more into political ends as the overstory unfolds? Do you find yourself feeling with the characters a sense of connection to the forest that drives you politically? This is nothing new in American writing, right? That when Henry David Thoreau goes into the woods to live deliberately in Walden, that there's a great amount of political action that drives him there, and also political action that is at work underneath the text as well. As he lives deliberately, he comes to certain political points of awareness, and which kind of leaves that question of like, does nature writing always have kind of a political dimension to it in the end? When you read an environmentalist novel, does it drive you towards a sense of political engagement? Is there a rhetoric that is at work under Powers' story? What political ends are present in the Overstory? You can also think about this in terms of narrative, in terms of the conflict here, right? Is this primarily a novel of a conflict between the human and non-human worlds, or do you read this as a series of conflicts that are purely human in some ways, that it's about how human beings kind of through conflict redefine the values of societies and cultures in the end? If you read it as a purely human versus human novel, how do you understand the forest's presence within it? In what ways are the forest's interested or non-interested presence in how human beings kind of work out their sense of value in this novel, in this world that, as Powers says on page 466, a world that means two such opposite things: the real world that we cannot see, and the invented world that we cannot escape. And in what ways does the non-human and the human worlds intersect within that tangle there? The novel itself is kind of an exploration of growing ecological awareness, and characters are driven in various directions of political engagement as they grow in that awareness. From earlier on in the novel, you see Mimi growing in a sense of awareness of her connection and her to a wider ecology, a wider world ecology, as well as a local ecology, as well as her sense of disconnection in what she does, in her work. As they approach the logging site, she reflects, 10 more yards and they're criminals. The roar grows sickening. In half a mile, they're up against human ingenuity at its best. She can name the metal beasts better than she can name the different trees. A feller buncher doing in a day what a team of human cutters would need a week to get through. A self-loading forwarder trailer and a scraper. Hard hats block the road ahead of them. Their foreman says, "You're trespassing." The two ends of the human chain lock themselves with bike cables to trees on either side of the road. Mimi watches the foreman make all kinds of cost-benefit calculations. It's a funny thing about capitalism. Money you lose by slowing down is always more important than money you've already made. As she reflects here, right, she's thinking about her own work as an engineer, her own sense of how she has been taught to value things, through numbers, and how she's been taught to balance costs and benefits, and how capital does that as well, right? Of what's available and what value does that have? How do you balance the value of resources against the human costs that might be involved in extracting those resources? And so her progress through the novel is one of of growing in an ecological awareness, but also in a growing sense of disconnection that her life has involved coming up to this point. For many of the characters in this novel, that growing ecological awareness is also an awareness of democracy's failure here. In what ways has the democratic institutions in the democratic institutions that they know, in what ways have those institutions failed them and failed to maintain a sense of ecological interest here? When Pavlicek is initially arrested for protesting a city's cutting down of trees in a public space, his argument to the arresting officer is, but the officials were the ones trying to shut down democracy here. And so, he has a sense that it's not him who has failed, to follow the law. It's the institution, the officials that have failed to recognize the voice of the people. Nick also recognizes this, as the group is trying to figure out, what should their response be? How far do they take their sense of ecological outrage? As he reflects, all the laws are on their side, backed by the will of the American people. We're a bunch of unemployed vandals camping out in the woods. So that sense of alienation from the larger will of the American populace is reflected there. In what ways does the group have a claim on democratic value? In what ways do they have a sense of purpose that seems more democratic, as they pursue their ecological agenda? There are levels of ecological and political rhetoric present throughout the book in the way that Patricia Westerford, moves through the forest, the ways in which she writes, the ways in which she speaks. On pages 450 and following, she speaks of her own sense of ecological awareness. She says, "We've begun to understand the profound ties between trees and people, but our separation has grown faster than our connection. There's always the same distal cause. The year's clocks are off by a month or two. Whole ecosystems are unraveling. Life is so generous and we are so inconsolable. But nothing I can say will wake the sleepwalker, make this suicide seem real. It can't be real, right? I mean, here we are, all still. But a forest knows things. They wire themselves up underground, link enough trees together, and a forest grows aware. Trees stand at the heart of ecology, and they must come to stand at the heart of human politics." And that sense of connection with forest is one of the things that drives characters' ecological and political imagination here. In fact, throughout the novel, it drives some characters to that sense of wanting to pursue eco-terrorism, if you want to use that phrase, to pursue the goals of what they deem the forest wants or needs, right? Nick in the group, has understands how, what this means, both personally to them as well as, politically within the culture. In one of their acts, he reflects, it's a single act of desperation. They target a sawmill near Solis, California. Deadly machinery burns better than any of them expected. The letters are artful, that as he puts up the tag, "No to the suicide economy. A line has been crossed. The job is done." So there's a strong sense of awareness of connection to the forest here, right? Of connection to the ecological purpose that is manifested through, political violence, within the group. And it's one of those tensions that will drive the novel to its end. It is the end that Adam feels throughout the novel as he becomes more and more involved with the group. What does it mean to become a traitor to your own species? And perhaps that's one of the questions that's left with the reader of the novel here. As Adam, joins the group and becomes more and more involved in their acts, and as he later will follow his own course in terms of this violence, he reflects the clarity of recent weeks. He's left in the insanity of denying the bedrock of human existence, property and mastery. Nothing else counts. Earth will be monetized until all trees grow in straight lines. Three people own all 7 continents, and every large organism is bred to be slaughtered. And that's the perspective that he takes, the political perspective that he takes, that drives him towards the acts of violence that he sees as resistance to the suicide economy, as they feel themselves driven in the novel to resist the capital forces that are that are harvesting these old growth forests. And it is the kind of a central tension that drives Adam's purpose, and it is a tension that as readers we come face to face with in Power's novel.